To start off with, let's just talk about defining what slow living is. And slow living as a concept, didn't really, I never knew what it was until I started following it or started aligning with it. And then the term kind of came up in my reality, and I was like, oh, that's what I'm doing. So I don't know what the dictionary definition. There probably is no dictionary definition at this point, but I don't know. What I'm trying to say is I don't know what other people define slow living as, but for me, in my life experience, the concept of slow living is basically a lifestyle shift or a lifestyle, period. A lifestyle where the pace of your life is a lot slower than what the modern culture is used to. So when you think of modern culture and you think of productivity culture and hustle culture and just the way that the mainstream or when you kind of project your awareness out into the collective or the rest of humanity, and especially when you tune into cities and things like that and just modern realities that have been created, the pace of living in these spaces in this modern age is very, very fast paced. Even with just the fact that we have, where we are now is actually even more fast paced than a few decades ago because we also have the internet now. But this idea of how fast experiences are being had, how quickly we are moving from one plot point in our life to another, how much information we are processing at a time. And it's just, when you really tune into it, it is a very, we've kind of set ourselves, the majority of humanity has kind of set ourselves at a very, I shouldn't say majority of humanity. Let's just recognize that my perspective is coming from a Western lens, but also the lens of countries that would be deemed first world countries. So let's just say those civilizations, the pace is very, very fast. It's all about the output, all about maximizing efficiency, getting things done as quick as possible, bearing fruit as quick as possible, which is also something that I will get a bit deeper in later on this episode. So slow living, conversely, is kind of a revolution against that fast-paced mode of being that we've kind of found ourselves in, or most of us have been programmed to operate within. Slow living is kind of being actually recognizing actually that pace doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for my body. It doesn't work for my mind. It doesn't work with my natural flow of creation and the natural ways that I want to be in this world, the natural ways that I want to live this life. It's about recognizing that and then changing aspects of your life to align, to slow down, So for me, I have been running at a very, very fast pace for most of my life because I have always had this really urgent desire to accomplish, this really urgent desire to be successful and to gain a traditional, the traditional achievements of success. In previous episodes and previous videos on my channel, I've definitely mentioned how I grew up and I was that classic archetype of the golden child. I was really, really good at school and I just excelled in the ways that my environment wanted me to excel in, And so it was really, really great when that was happening because I was doing things, measuring it up against the external validators of the time, which were school and my parents' perceptions, and then getting that feedback that I was doing something good. So it was all good and great when it was working out and when everything was lining up like that. But as soon as I started diverging from the external validators' view of reality, and as soon as I started doing things and wanting to be in ways wanting to exist in ways that didn't line up perfectly with those external validators, that's when I started like running into some problems, you know? And what led me here to the slow living path recently, I would say that I've always been building up to kind of lead me here, and I've always had tastes of what it's like to experience the slow living revolution, as I'm choosing to call it in this moment. But I could never sustain it because what has always prevented me from operating in this natural state of, in my natural pace, which is more aligned with the slow living pace, which is a slower pace of moving than maybe modern society wants me to move. That feels to be my natural pace, and so therefore I've naturally experienced it at different parts of my life, but it was really, really hard for me to sustain it, and I would always go back to the programmed state, you know? So, okay, so now there's kind of visual brewing or being cultivated. So there's like a way of being that I am naturally tend to kind of operate within. So if I don't have many external influences, and if I'm kind of just in my own zone, in my own space, and I don't have many external pressures, I will operate in my natural state of being. But when there are external factor or external pressures, and I'm like being very influenced by them, and I'm like very open to being influenced by them, that's like the programmed state or the conditioned state that I had been operating in for most of my life. Oh, this is also tying back in why I was mentioning being the golden child. Being in the program state worked really well for me for most of my life. Being that perfect child, being that perfect student, being that golden child. But then at a certain point in my life, I started diverging from it. And so that inner desire to operate in my natural pace, as opposed to my, like okay, here's a better way to say it. Also, by the way, if you're listening to this on just audio, I also have a video up on my YouTube channel. So if I'm saying that because I'm doing some like hand gestures. So, and then I just realized that some people will be listening to this on audio only. But anyway, what I'm saying is here, so I have my hand gestures now. So one hand is the programmed way of being. Another hand is my natural state of being. So when I was a golden child and I was like operating as that archetype, and I was doing really well, and everyone really was good at, like, everyone just like was always complimenting me and validating me and telling me how great I was, because my natural state at that time, what I was naturally inclined to do and what made sense to me, it lined up with the programmed state. But as I grew older and I started learning more about myself and I started differentiating as an individual, my natural, so now for those in audio, my hands were lined up and now they're kind of separating. So as I grew older, my programmed self and my natural self started diverging. And at this point in my life, in young adulthood, I had to start confronting that fact that, oh, my natural state of being is no longer lining up with how society and how maybe the people around me or how my family or whatever want me to be. And now what do I do with that? And there's been so many different layers to this and so many different aspects of my life. But the slow living one, like the topic that we're focusing on for this episode, that has really, really been reflected most in my career and how I operate in my business and how I operate in my like creative life and my creative output and just my productivity in general. And so what led me to this mode of being, this like kind of this process, this commitment to deconditioning myself from that fast-paced mode of being was that I had been just this feeling of burnout, this feeling of bitterness, burnout, feeling super depleted, and always feeling like whatever I was doing was not enough, you know. And that also, it also kind of always felt like I was chasing something. Like when I was trying to keep up with the world's pace, or how I perceive the world's pace to be. It always felt like I was trying to chase something, you know? It's like I have like, yeah, like I was always trying to chase. I was in this like chasing energy, and you know, like when you're chasing something, the thing that you're trying to chase is like also running away from you, so it's just a very exhausting process. So that's where I was. And I guess in August, I just was like, all right, I'm really done with this chasing energy. I'm not seeing the fruits of my labor at all. I just feel like I'm running and running and running and not getting anywhere. And I don't feel fulfilled, and I'm feeling super depleted, and I feel like there's no point to this. Like, what is the point? Like, everything's just started, my reality just started kind of feeling meaningless. And this is actually also the time that I stopped making YouTube videos, right? Because I think the last upload that I had was uploaded in late August. So yeah, it's all kind of lining up, because at that point I was just like, I'm so done with this. And then I decided in that moment that, you know what, let's just see what happens. I'm just gonna be at my own pace. I'm just going to do things at the rate that I want to do them, not at the rate that I think I should do them. And what this looked like for me, by the way, I will get into some methods that I started implementing into my life that helped me slow down my pace. But like when it comes to the conceptual part of it, when it comes to action taking in general, I used to kind of, my method of like taking action used to be like, you know, just being like, okay, this is my vision, this is where I need to be, and then just like very mentally coming up with a list of action items that I thought would get me to the place that I wanted to be, and then just like trying to get through those action items as quick as possible, completely disregarding and ignoring my body's signals, like how my body was doing at this point, like not really paying attention to my own energy meter, and instead just like trying my best to just like squeeze as much out of myself as possible, as quick as possible. And this is like, so then I kind of understand like this like chasing energy. It's like I'm not paying attention to how my body's feeling, how I'm feeling. I'm just like running and trying to chase this thing, but I'm like hyper fixated on the thing that I'm chasing, which is this vision that I've cultivated within myself. And this is like, it's like living in the future versus living in the present. So that being in that like fast pace, although it felt fun, because the thing with like being fast paced is that there's a satisfaction that comes from feeling like you're moving forward really fast. The issue though is when your body can't keep up with how fast you're moving, and then even though mentally you're like excited about yourself and you're like yeah, I'm like so proud of myself for being so productive, whatever, but then your body on the other hand feels like shit, you know? And that's the body is what like slowed me down, and is what was like kind of prompted me to reconsider how I was operating in this world. At the time, like in that chasing mode, like being super hyper fixated on the future and not really in the present, not really in my body, not really paying attention to how I was feeling in the now, it was also creating this just straight up inability to be here now, you know, because I was prioritizing the future so much and I was just trying to run there as fast as possible. I couldn't, like, I just straight up, it was just too uncomfortable. It was too uncomfortable to be here now. Because in the process of like hyperfixating on the future, I'm not paying attention to my body's cues. I'm over depleting myself. I feel like shit in the present. As long as I keep focusing on the future, I won't notice that I feel like shit in the present, you know. And that's like why it was also really difficult for me to be here now, you know. And slow living, as like in juxtaposition to that, slow living, the lifestyle of slow living, it is all about being here now. It is about, I explained this to Garrett the other day. It's like almost like this idea of wringing out all the goodness of the present moment that you can possibly can. You know, it's like learning how to do that, learning how to I don't want to use the word extract, but it's like learning how to receive and absorb all the goodness that already exists here now. Coming back into the present, cultivating presence to such a great level that you don't even feel the need to like look forward, you know, like you look forward for fun, but it doesn't become the prime focus of your existence. So being in the future as well, right? Like rewind a little bit. So when I was like in that mode and I was chasing and I was running and I was trying to get to my vision and I was ignoring my present self, I was also self-sabotaging my progress to get to my vision. Because the thing is that if I'm here and I am looking into the future and that's where my lens is, I don't actually know what the next best step is to get me to the future, because I'm pretending as if I'm already, like I'm kind of already living in the future. So any actions that I take are kind of coming from that place in the future and not actually in the place from the present. So an example of that is something that I was doing in my coaching business. So because I was so hyper fixated on where I wanted to go and like income goals and all of that, I was like, okay, I am going to follow all of the people, all of the coaches and facilitators that are already at that future level that I want to be in, because I want to be there. That's what I was fixated on. I didn't want to follow coaches and facilitators that were at my same level. I wanted to follow those that were where I wanted to be. And this could apply, like if I'm just speaking of the coaching industry because that was my recent experience, but this could be in anything, you know, like when you want to get, when you want to progress in your career, we're likely to follow those who are like already ultra successful on that path. But the problem with that was that because I was following these people, I started absorbing their ways of seeing and their lenses, which wasn't actually helpful for me because it didn't apply. You know, so like if I'm watching them and they're doing something and I'm like, oh, that's a really good idea, I should do it. But it doesn't actually apply to me because I'm not where they are. I need to like rewind a lot and I need to go look at where I actually am in the here and now and be like, is this strategy, for example, actually going to help me? Like a strategy that they're going to use with a huge audience is not the same strategy that I'm going to have, that is going to work for me with the smaller audience that I have, because I am not where they are. I'm in the present. So that's kind of what I mean. It was almost like I was by living in the future, by trying to like hustle and trying to run as fast as I could towards my goals, I had an inability to see what was actually needed. Like what were the actions that would actually work for me in the here and now, because I kept trying to take actions that would work for me probably when I was in the future. You know what? You get what I'm saying? Do you catch my drift? But it was just this distorted lens, and it was just like making it even more depleting of a situation, because I was just like running and then things weren't working and then I was still trying to run, and it was just this like never ending cycle of depletion. Yeah. And it was also just this like trying to this concept or this like energy of like trying to extract as much out of myself as possible without consideration of what my resources actually are at the time, or like what my level of resources are. And this kind of mirrors our society's larger issues. Like we have a very over extractive culture where our extraction, like we're like unbalanced in how we extract from ourselves and how we extract from our environment. We don't really take into consideration what the resource levels are of ourselves or of what we're extracting from. So for example, like nature, you know, when we're gathering resources, we just have this idea like, I want this thing made, and so I don't care, I'm just gonna get this thing made. And you're just like extracting without fully kind of paying attention to there's a word that I need to say. it slipped my mind. But we're not really, because we're so focused on what we want to create and so focused on the future vision, we're completely oblivious to the state of wellness of what we're extracting from. So when you look out in the world and you look at the environmental crisis, it's like we have this like desire and this need to like make things, and we're extracting from earth without taking a moment to consider, actually, is earth gonna be okay if I continue on this path? Like maybe, like instead of being like, maybe I should check in with earth and check in with her resource levels and see if there's something else that needs to be done before I extract and extract and extract. And then the same way, we do this to ourselves when it comes to creation and when it comes to like creative output and productivity. We're just like, okay, I want this project done, or I want this like deliverable done, and I have this deadline, and we're not paying attention to our own energy levels, our own states of well-being, our own levels of health, and instead we're just so like hyperfixated on the end goal. And so we're extracting as much as we can from ourselves, and it's like, no wonder we're feeling depleted, you know? And no wonder it's like we're feeling at the same time this like the state of like not enoughness, because on one hand, like at a core level of ourselves, there is a not enoughness. Like we don't have enough resources available to operate and to extract from ourselves at the pace and the level that we are accustomed to, you know. And that not enoughness, that sensation of not enoughness, then also like expands out into our general feelings of our life and our general feelings of our perceptions of our reality, like us feeling like there's not enough of this, or there's not enough of that, or I need this, like this constant like need to like chase something or go after something and go after the next thing because whatever we have right now is not enough. So in the summer, so like now we're trying to, hold on, I'm just gonna drink some water real quick. An interesting side note is that a thought that keeps reoccurring as I'm filming this right now is like I feel rushed. It's so funny because I'm talking about slow living, and as I'm recording this, there's a part of me that's like, maybe we should go faster. Like, yeah, is this episode too long? Is this getting too long? We still have this much to cover. Like, it's funny. There's an urgency even present as I'm talking about slowness and slow living. So, funny tangent. This is also like a great moment to mention. When we talk about like lifestyle changes, like for example, if you're someone who listens to this episode and is like, oh yeah, slow living, like maybe I should slow down too, and you start the process of deconditioning yourself and trying to live in that way and trying to live in your natural pace, that you're still going to have moments where your mind is going to be like wanting to revert back to the programmed way of being, because the programmed way of being feels safe, because that is the way of being that is externally validated, right? And so one thing to remember is that if you do want to do anything that goes against the mainstream flow, you're going to experience those inner voices that make you feel like what you're doing is not right, and that you should stop because it's dangerous. But just know that over time, as you keep showing up for yourself in the way that you want to show up, so in this example, as you keep showing up in your slower pace, and as you keep stopping yourself from rushing things, and those voices begin to get quieter and quieter. But I'm literally here making a whole podcast episode about this, and I'm still having those thoughts, so it's normal. Yeah, so the next thing that I wanted to... So the natural cycle of plants. What a smooth transition of each. I know. So, as in my processing since like August to now, and just in general over the past few years, and just like in my reflections of being like, this way of being is just not working for me. This summer, as I was processing that and processing like something needs to shift, I don't really know how to shift it, whatever. It was summertime, and in the summertime we're living in a really beautiful place at the cottage, and we have enough space for like a garden. And so this summer we had a little garden, and we planted we had a bunch of herbs and things, but we also had we also grew some tomatoes, we grew some habanero peppers, some jalapeno peppers. And I think this is the first time in my life that I've ever seen a plant grow from, well, some things we had that we grew from seeds, and some things were like just like little plants and then they grew. But just the idea, this is like one of the first times that I've seen a plant grow, like a full life cycle of a plant. I'm just going to change the brightness real quick. It works. I guess it doesn't matter. But this is basically, this summer was the first time that I really was able to witness the natural life cycles of a plant. And witnessing that, I think, naturally helped me slow down my pace a little, because I was like, okay, this is taking forever, like going from like growing a plant. There is a lot of patience that it requires, especially if you're growing a plant that will harvest some fruit that you can consume. When you do it, and when you're used to living in the modern pace, like super, super fast, super unnatural, when you start growing a plant and when you start like witnessing the natural cycle of a plant, it is like so slow, like it just takes so long. But being in observation of that, it naturally begins to help you realize, oh, this is likely closer to my natural pace. And at the same time, it also begins to like sprout this concept that there is no urgency, and that even though this process is taking so long, it's okay. Like it's totally fine. Why can't it take as long as it wants to? And then at the same time realizing, like, the longer that something is cultivated, the more nutrients are being absorbed into it, like the better the end result, the better the fruit of the labor. And all of these things, like just these realizations and these like ideas and wisdom start absorbing into you, into your psyche, just by witnessing a plant grow. And that has really helped me this summer. It helped, specifically helped me with like an inner acceptance of my own pace. Because when I first realized that the regular pace of modern culture, as I will continue to call it, just wasn't the pace for me, I was kind of mad about it and kind of resentful, because that's annoying, like I want to keep up with everyone. I want to be externally validated. And it was hard for me to accept. But then when I had the experience of witnessing plants in their natural flows and in their as they grow in their natural pace, it became easier and easier to accept myself, because I was like, oh, I'm a part of nature and it's perfect. This pace is perfect. The pace that I want to be is perfect. The pace that I want to exist at is a perfect pace for me, because that is a pace that will allow me to properly synchronize with the rest of creation, with the rest of my environment. Because I'm someone who really believes that we're not like individuals operating individually. Like, I think that everything is absolutely connected and nothing is a coincidence, and everything works together in this like grand pattern. And the more that I operate in my natural state of being and less try to operate and copy and clone myself to be like someone else, the more I fit in with my environment, the more my life begins to flow better, the more everything begins to synchronize and things just become more effortless because I'm allowing myself to be moved by structures greater than just my little teeny individual self, you know? So yeah, so that brings me to, like, conversely, like when I was talking at the beginning of this episode, what led me into this idea of slow living or trying to decondition myself, or the process of deconditioning myself and slowing down my pace of being. It was like feeling burnt out and feeling super depleted. So I just want to spend the next few moments to talk about what I'm experiencing now as a result of devoting myself to this practice of slow living and devoting myself to cultivating patience and devoting myself to dissolving impatience and just allowing myself to like move slower. First of all, it's just like the first thing that comes to mind as I say that is I'm learning how to be fully satiated in each present moment. So now that I am moving slower and I'm allowing things to take as long as they need to take. So for example, bringing it back to like an example to help you kind of understand what it's looking like in my life, this slow living philosophy has affected my creative process the most. And so in the past, when I wanted to create a project, I would, like I said, I would try to get action items done as quick as possible. Now, I still have that list of action items and I still have like a list of things that I want to do and things that I want to accomplish, but I wait for my inner cue. Like I call it my inner green light, my intuitive inner green light that will tell me when it is the right time to do something. And the best way I can describe it's just this feeling. Like it's just this feeling like that kind of I guess it's like a desire, you know? So it's kind of hard to explain if you haven't experienced it yourself. But you know how sometimes there's a task that you want to do and when you don't actually want to do it but you feel like you should do it, it just getting that you can still complete the task, but it feels so difficult to get through. Like it just feels so like things just keep going wrong and it just feels so effortful. That's one way of doing things. Okay, like so for me in my life, if I'm experiencing that means my inner green light is not green and that I need to wait to get that task done. When I do wait for that inner green light and when I'm actually like when there's a task in front of me and I'm excited to do it, then when I actually do it and the inner green light is on, I'll experience flow state really easily. Everything will just happen so effortlessly. Like it'll just feel super meant to be in that moment. And so living at a slower pace, that's been one of the ways that I've been doing it, is just allowing myself to like have my task list, but waiting until that moment where it actually feels aligned to do that task before I do it. And then dealing with all of the impatience that comes up when I feel like I should do a task. I'm like, oh no, I need to get this done by this time, you know, because mentally I'm like, I should have this done by now. Whenever those thoughts come up, being able to sit with them and feel them and kind of disarm them, like not letting those thoughts control my action taking, like not letting the obligation feel energy or the feeling like I should do something control what I'm doing. I'm also learning how to be fully satiated in the present moment, like living slower and needing external validation less. It's helping, like I'm just kind of training myself on how to feel satisfied and feel full in the now moment, because before I used to draw my fulfillment and draw my satiation and how fulfillment and satisfaction from how the external world was responding to me. But living slower and not allowing myself to like be such a vampire, you know. For example, if I'm rushing a post, one of the reasons why I even feel the need to rush the post is because in that moment, there's a part of me that really wants the satisfaction of getting likes. Like, I really wants that, like, dopamine hit, you know? And so when I stop doing that, when I resist that temptation to, like, be a vampire and extract satisfaction from something external to me, when I'm no longer letting myself get it from that avenue, and I'm just, like, instead sitting in my room by myself in silence, sitting with the feeling that urge to post, I'm, like, disarming that energy, but also at the same, like, I'm kind of, like, dissolving its charge and its hold that it has on me. But at the same time, I'm also naturally finding ways to get that satisfaction from somewhere else. And what that has looked like is, like, I'm starting to find satisfaction just in my immediate reality. You know, like, I've just not all of a sudden, but as I have been diving deeper and deeper into the slow living path, it's becoming easier for me to be open to the beauty that already exists around me. Like, I feel like I'm naturally just so much more appreciative of all the, like, even little things around me that are good, that I can celebrate. So, for example, like, this flower bouquet behind me. Sorry, I shook my thing. But this flower bouquet behind me, it brings me so much joy. And, you know, and when I was in that mode of fast living, I wouldn't even have noticed it that much. You know, it's like, oh yeah, okay, flowers, great, pretty, amazing. But that's it, right? And then I'm on to the next thing. But now that I have slowed down significantly, I actually have the time and I actually have the desire to observe those flowers and to really be with that flower bouquet and be, like, to really contemplate its existence and be appreciative of it. Because, yeah, that's a flower bouquet that's just sitting on my nightside table and it's very beautiful, but that's a very superficial lens to view it with. Like, there's a lot of beauty that is absorbed from that flower bouquet when I contemplate all the people that have touched that bouquet, like all the people that have devoted their energy into getting this bouquet here, you know, so in growing it, in distributing it, like, you know, there's so many different parts there's just so many different things that had to happen for this bouquet to land here. And when you actually slow down and spend time with the things in your environment, you realize, like, how valuable things are, especially things that are, like, everyday things, and we don't really realize how valuable they are. We're not taught that they're valuable or as valuable. When you slow down and really contemplate it, you begin to realize, like, actually how valuable everything is in your immediate environment. You know, even, like, furniture. Like, what? Like, someone made this. So many the resources had to be extracted from the earth. Someone had to design it. Like, there's just so many things that had to happen that are just so... I guess what I'm trying to say is that when you slow down, you stop taking things for granted. It's easier to be appreciative of things because you realize all of the moving parts that had to happen. Like, again, I'm just repeating myself and I feel like I've repeated myself a lot. But yeah, there's just so much that had to happen to get that thing to you, and, like, what a joy, like, what a gift. So going back to creation and creative expression, one thing that I'm also realizing as I have been moving slower is that there's a natural refinement of my self-expression happening. Before, because I was in such a rush to like output my creations, the filter that I had, that determined whether I post something or not, it was just like, I will post anything that comes to my mind. Now that I'm moving a bit slower, I am able to refine my process and be more intentional with what I put out there. And my messaging is kind of, as a result, becoming clearer and more cohesive and more easily digestible to my audience and to those that are receiving my work, which is great. And it's being felt, because when you're a creator, and especially if you're someone that is creating content online that relates to changing the way people think, it's really helpful to do so in a way that's actually digestible to the other person. Because if you're just dumping information on them regularly and they're not able to digest it, what's the point? So that's also another thing that I'm realizing, another way that I am benefiting from the slower pace. And then last little section that I had like outlined in my notes here, some of the ways that I want to leave you with, that if you feel the desire to experience slow living, or like incorporating slow living into your own life, but you don't really know how to start, well, one way is definitely like how I was, like, if you're a creator and you're creating content and things like that, just allowing yourself to be patient with how your creations come through, and not allowing yourself to force things. And if this is something that resonates with you and you do want to experience like dissolving that obligation energy when it comes to your creation process, I highly recommend joining my Overflow Mystery School. So that space right now is like fully dedicated to people that want to begin creating from a more natural pace, and for the people who want to start deconditioning themselves from creating from urgency or creating from obligation. So that's one thing. Another thing is to cut down on phone stimulation, and this is obviously like something, like, of course, like everyone's always talking about like being on your phone less, but that really does help, because being in your own energy is a great way to understand what your own pace is. The more that you are intaking other people's content, other people's energies through your phone or through the virtual realms, the more that you will be influenced by them and their pacing. So if you can incorporate hours in your day where you're not on your phone as much, that can be really, really helpful. What I do personally is I have trained myself to be very intentional with my phone use. Like, I will mostly only use my phone if I'm, well, in the morning, like I won't turn my phone on until like a few hours later, when I actually have like an intentional reason why I'm going on it. So for example, I'll like spend my morning, do my morning routine, be in my own energy, and then it'll be time to like check my messages, because I'm like collaborating with someone and I need to check those messages. So I'm like going into my phone with a game plan rather than just like turning on my phone and getting like lost in the scroll. Some people also just like find it easy to train themselves like by putting their phone in like a hard to access place, like in a drawer, or something in another room or something like that, just to help you pattern interrupt and allow yourself to be more intentional with how you're using your phone, right? Because if it's in a drawer and you have to like go to another room and open the drawer, and like that's enough of a delay between you getting the urge to be on your phone and you actually being on your phone, that will give you enough time to like contemplate whether you actually need to be on your phone or not, and if you do, what the purpose is. Because like the phone is a great tool. I love also receiving inspiration and scrolling Instagram and things like that, but I do so now consciously. Like I do so with a purpose. I will sit there and have this thought like, okay, I really feel like tuning into other people's energies right now, you know, and then I'll do so. And then when I feel like I've gotten my fill. So for example, it's kind of like when you're eating, right? You get hungry, you eat, and then at a certain time you're full. It's the same. I'm realizing it's the same with content consumption. You feel the desire to consume some content because you want inspiration, or like as creative beings, like it's good for us to also have an input so that we can process and then output our creations from that input. But then at a certain point, like as you're scrolling, as you're intaking, you're gonna get full. And then you have to recognize when that moment happens and then be able to like put your phone down in that moment. Otherwise, you're gonna start feeling sick. Like literally, like for me, I think I've also grown some sensitivity energetically. So I will legit start feeling nauseous if I over consume too much online or whatever. So that has helped a lot too, just that being more mindful of other people's energies and other people's creations, and being more mindful of how they're influencing me and how they're influencing my own pace. And the other thing is, like, I'm just talking about slow living because that is what applies to me in my life, in the way that my system works. But you might be listening to this and slow living is not like, there are some people that are, they're designed to move fast, and you might be one of them. So don't listen to this and be like, oh, she's getting so much out of it, so slow living is the best way. No, the best way is your way. So just the whole point of me even talking about, it's like slow living works for me, and slow living works for probably a lot of the people who will be attracted to watching this video or listening to this podcast episode. But there's also going to be people listening to this, and that might be you, where slow living doesn't actually resonate with you. Maybe the way that society moves, that fast-paced rhythm of output, maybe that is fun for you, and maybe that is what works with your resource levels and etc. So don't think that one is better than the other. It's just what's better is what feels good to you and what is sustainable for you. For me, a slower pace is sustainable and a faster pace is not. But for you, a faster pace may be more sustainable than a slower pace. So yeah, and then there's all these other conversations that can be had around creative processes in general, and how some people, like, we all have such different ways that we create, and different things that we are meant to create, and all of those different ways of creation, they take different times. There's just like the natural cycle of a plant, that's a very slow process, but there's certain creative processes that happen a lot quicker, so there's no right or wrong here. It's just being mindful of what your alignment, where your alignment lies. And then the last thing, this is like a very recent milestone. No, what's the word? A very recent development on this slow living path is cooking. Cooking is a great way to practice living slowly. And especially for me, I have found that cooking without other stimulation, so I used to cook a lot and watch shows at the same time or listen to podcasts at the same time, but like cooking in silence and just being in the flow of that has helped with the slow living practice as well. Especially now that I'm started, like this past week, I started baking my own bread, and just slow, like from scratch, going through the process of making those things can really help you become accustomed to slower paces, because you begin to just observe the beauty in it, and it becomes, again, like I was saying earlier, becomes easier to accept that as a good way of being. Just as we've learned to accept the fast pace of living, we can also learn to accept and have fun and feel good in the slower pace. And yeah, cooking is the last thing that I wanted to mention. It's a great way to practice and a great way to train yourself to enjoy slow-paced stuff. But yes, and that is the end of my notes, and so therefore that is the end of this podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you had fun. It was really nice to pick it was really nice to get the green light to record this today. You know, I can already feel like because of this lifestyle shift that I'm making, that making podcasts and making videos is going to start feeling more enjoyable for me than it ever has before. And I'm so happy about that, because I honestly love sharing myself in this way. But what has always stopped me is me depleting myself to do so. But now that I'm learning how to nourish myself and learning how to manage my energy more efficiently and not deplete myself, I feel like it's just going to be a really great renaissance. Does that word work? It's just going to be a really great renaissance for me when it comes to my videos and my presence on YouTube and my presence sharing my voice and my ideas verbally and on video and things. So yeah, thank you for listening. I love you so much. See you in the next podcast episode.